at the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority as we take stock of the industry. And of course, Captain, yes. Happy New Year and welcome to KTN Business Today.
Happy New Year, Mr. Agina. Thank you.
First question, of course, is cost of air travel in the country, according to many Kenyans, is still prohibitive.
Yes.
Forcing many to stick to the other modes of transport. What has been happening in terms of bringing down the cost of air travel?
A lot has been happening, actually. You know, in the recent past, a ticket to Mombasa used to cost 20,000 shillings. You can still get a ticket to Mombasa today for 20,000 shillings. But because of the liberalization of air services within Kenya, that our authority has been promoting, KC has been promoting,
yes,
new players have come into the market. So Kenya Airways now has competition in the likes of Jumbo Jet, Silverstone, Skyward Express. We also have Safari Link, yes, Air Kenya, Fly 540, and SACS. All those new entrants have all started flying to Mombasa now. Today, you can get a one-way ticket to Mombasa for 5,000 shillings. Return tickets are between 10 and 15,000 shillings. So whereas you can still get a 20,000 shilling ticket, but you can still get a 10,000 shilling ticket to Mombasa. The cost of flying has reduced in Kenya tremendously, by even up to 50%. So in answer to the question you asked earlier,
yes,
airfares are now becoming more affordable. I'm not saying that they're cheap, but they're becoming more affordable for Kenyans.
Comparable to countries like, say, Ethiopia or South Africa, where does Kenya stand?
Well, there we need to look at the more international fares, because we've just spoken about domestic. But on international fares, Kenya Airways, in comparison with Ethiopian Airlines and other airlines, in particular the Middle East Airlines, KQ is still more expensive. They have a pricing policy which has not yet allowed them to reduce the fares to be more in competition with their competitors. So I would say on international air travel, KQ is more expensive than the competitors, but I believe they have programs in place where they want to reduce those fares.
And of course, it's not just a question of KQ. Looking at the bigger African pie,
yes,
of course, Kenya did host the ICANN.
Yes.
And one of the big conversation was on how do we normalize air travel in Africa. And
yes,
the biggest outcome was we really need to do a lot of reforms, especially in the taxes, especially when it comes to issues of uniformity.
Yes.
Because the taxes being charged play a big part. The landing fees translate into higher costs,
yes,
for operations for airlines,
yes,
and which the regulator, in this case, is the organization you represent.
Right. As a regulator, I need to inform you that we do not regulate airfares. We regulate air transport operations. Those are the technical operations.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. But now, it is true, air traffic or air travel in Africa is extremely expensive. In fact, on many of the routes, when you want to go from Nairobi to Joburg or to Lagos,
yeah,
or to Lilongwe, you find that the airfares are comparatively higher than an international fare. I know of certain fares where it is cheaper to go to Dubai or to go to London than it is to go to another African state like Dakar, for instance. Now, the reason for that is precisely what you have said. The tariffs that are charged against air tickets are actually very high. And that's because of the way the African states are operating today. They have encouraged high fares, high passenger service charges for various reasons, but mainly as a way of additional revenue to the various governments. But then what has been the effect of that? The effect of that has meant that the air travel in Africa is relatively low. Africa only has 3%. Going to 4% of global air transport movement.
This translates to about how many passengers? How many millions?
I don't have the figure offhand, but when you look at such a small percentage out of Africa's population, nearly 1 billion people, that is a very, very low utilization of air transport. But then the question you're asking, how are we going to make African air travel cheaper? Now, the good news is the AU, African Union Commission,
Yes.
Commissioned what was known as the Yamoussoukro Declaration of 1988 and the Yamoussoukro Decision of 1999 to create an implementation known as the Single African Air Transport Market, or we call it SATAM for short.
Correct.
The Single African Air Transport Market envisions that the airspace in Africa should become open sky. You've heard of the term open sky policy.
Sure.
But what does open sky mean? Open sky means that for African airlines who have signed up to implement SATAM, and incidentally, Kenya was the 11th state in January of 2017 to sign up for a solemn commitment to implement SATAM. Today, there were 26 African states out of 54 that have signed the solemn commitment.
Yeah.
And recently in ICANN, as we're going to discuss later, 2 other African states signed up to join. So we're now at 28 states, where more than half of Africa's states have signed a solemn commitment to implement SATAM.
All right.
Implementing SATAM means that our airspace in Africa becomes domestic airspace and not international. What does that mean?
Sure.
An air ticket today on an international flight attracts air passenger service charge of $50. But if you're doing a domestic flight from Nairobi to Mombasa, the air passenger service charge is $5 or 500 shillings.
Sure.
It is a tenth of the price of an international air passenger service charge.
So how significant will this be, Captain?
How difficult?
Significant.
Significant.
At the long run.
Yeah, if we're able to reduce government tariffs and charges by 90%, it means that the cost of air tickets will dramatically reduce. Because when you look at the cost of an airline ticket as sold by an airline, and then you look at the cost that you pay as a passenger, there's a huge disparity, nearly 50%. And all that, the price that you pay above is mainly tariffs and charges and all sorts of taxes. So imagine reducing that by half. Automatically, people will be able to afford to fly among African states.
Interesting.
That means that the dream for Pan-African states, the Pan-African dream, will become true, because aviation is one of the single largest enablers of economic growth of any state. So if flying in Africa became affordable among African states, you will see the Pan-African dream take off.
Wow. And still staying with this, Captain Kibe, of course, the viewer back home is keen to find out, if you're to give us a typical example, if we get through this implementation of all countries signing up SATA, how would it change, especially give or take a simple example of like flying from Nairobi to New York?
Now, you see, Nairobi to New York is an international journey. But if you're talking about an African journey,
say flying from here to Accra then?
From here to Accra, we could easily reduce the fare by 50%, if not more, if we decide and agree as Africans that we will have an open sky policy among us. But then the challenge with implementing SATAM, the Single African Air Transport Market, is getting each individual states to agree on the terms and conditions of how another African carrier can fly in and out of that state. So for me, I foresee that the implementation will be phased. It cannot be when all 54 African states sign that the next day Africa will be open sky. No. I see it as a progressive, and starting off on a regional basis. An example is EAC for us. The 6 East African partner states in EAC, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan, we sit together and we agree how are we going to open up our airspace. That means our airlines, our national airlines of the 6 countries, will be operating within ourselves as domestic flights and not international. Today, Nairobi-Dar, Nairobi Entebbe or Bujumbura is international, so you have to pay the $50. What if it's $5? And what if we reduce the taxes and charges here and there? When the airline is able to reduce the fare, and then they start developing volumes, moving masses of people, they will even be able to reduce their own fares as an airline. The result will be dramatic growth in development, economic development, and socio-economic development of EAC. And when you see that that is succeeding, it will even attract other states. We can now go to COMESA, we can go to SADC, we can go to ECOWAS, and we agree terms and conditions of how are we going to operate as domestic. Right. So I see it will work, but it may not work as fast as we would like it to be. So.
We do hope it happens in our lifetime.
Oh, yes, I hope it does.
All right.
That is our dream.
And Captain, we want to go on a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be going deeper into the conversation, looking at some of the key outcomes of ICANN.
Yes.
And of course, giving us the future outlook, prospects really, for the aviation sector in the country.
Okay.
Well, we are still continuing with our conversation with Captain Kibe Mungai, who actually, Captain Gilbert Kibe, beg your pardon, who is just breaking it down for us on the state of aviation in the country, and of course a lot to expect. Keep tweeting, share your questions. Of course, he did answer that the cost of air travel has gradually been coming down, but not to the level where the common man, say from Nyandarua, from Nyeri, can